Tonight on Primetime Politics, new Liberal ads, a Conservative housing plan, and an NDP message on election timing. Our political observers weigh in. The government says cyber threats to Canada are growing, from China, from Russia, and now from India. A top official tells us what it means for Canadians.
And we will make America great again.
We are not going back.
Pennsylvania could decide who ends up in the White House. We go inside the race in the Keystone State with Democratic State Senator Steve Santarsiero. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Andrew Thompson in for Michael Serapio. We start tonight with new fundraising numbers for Canada's federal political parties. Conservatives again lead the way, raising more than $8.4 million last quarter. That's compared to $3.3 million for the Liberals and $1.3 million for the NDP between July and September. Now, as for 2024 as a whole, the Conservatives have now brought in $29 million. With the Liberals at $10.2 million and New Democrats near the $4 million mark. There have been calls from Liberals to spend more on party advertising and try and catch up with Conservatives. And today, Liberals are rolling out a new digital healthcare ad targeting Pierre Poilievre. Here's a portion.
Now they're rolling out dental care, and they're getting pharmacare done to deliver free contraceptives and diabetes medications. Pierre Poilievre has made it clear that he would make cuts to all these investments, removing healthcare services from millions of Canadians. Canadians need progress, not cuts. We won't go back.
All right, well, let's talk about that ad and more of this week's developments with our panel of political observers. Susan Smith is a former Liberal strategist, now principal and co-founder with Blue Sky Strategy Group. Cole Hogan is a Conservative digital strategist and principal at GT & Company. And George Soule is a former NDP Director of Communications, now principal at Syntax Strategic. Cole, I'm going to start with you as a digital ad expert. You saw that ad. There's been a lot of talk on Parliament Hill about when the Liberals might ramp up their advertising to try and catch up with what Conservatives have been doing. Do you think what we just saw here on healthcare and the Conservative leader is an effective message?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the Liberal Party for actually coming out with an ad 2 years later after Pierre Poilievre has become leader. It's interesting to watch that they focused on healthcare. When I look at the polling in terms of like what party Canadians trust most to deal with healthcare, it's Conservatives and the NDP tied, and then the Liberals are right under them, but it's a pretty close race. So I understand the focus on healthcare, but I wonder if it's going to land in the same way. And, you know, like you mentioned, I do a lot of work on the digital ad campaign side. I follow the ad spends. And over the last 7 days in particular, the Conservatives have spent $80,000 and the Liberals have spent $4,500. Over the last 90 days, the Conservatives have spent almost $800,000 and the Liberals have spent about $80,000. So there's a wide gap there, and that gap continues. So it'll be interesting to see how much money they put behind this ad, because the amount that they spend will directly correlate with how much confidence they have in the message in this ad.
Susan, what do you think? Because look, we could still be nearly a year away from an election, but is it too little too late even now?
Well, I agree with Cole on some things and I disagree with him on others. Finally, they've got an ad. I said, and people have heard this many, many times, I said the night that Pierre Poilievre was elected that the Liberals needed to start an ad campaign against him. They didn't do it. So there is a big gap that they have to close. Finally, they're starting to close that gap. I do think it's smart to start with healthcare. As we see in the provincial elections that have been taking place, that is an important issue for Canadians, and the polling is continuing to show it. And what the Liberals are trying to remind Canadians is pharmacare, dental care, and other programs are connected to health. That you could put in a big health envelope, and that they are linked and have done things and delivered things with regards to that. It's up to 1 million people in the dental care program now. So I think it's a good place to start. They have to start talking about Poilievre in some way. They are late to the game. They definitely don't have the money that the Conservatives do, but they do have a good testing machine. So I think if they think it works, then you'll see the ad.
George, it is interesting, though, from the NDP perspective, because we are seeing, again, Liberals really focusing on a lot of the items that were in that NDP agreement, taking credit on things relating to healthcare, as Susan mentioned. What's your take on this?
Well, for sure. I mean, again, I'll repeat and agree that, you know, 1 million people today getting the dental care is huge. It means that people are actually feeling that and getting that benefit. So talking about how Pierre Poilievre is going to cut that, the more people who have it in a tangible way, that matters a lot. But I also think, like, to Susan's point, you're right, healthcare has been a big part of provincial campaigns, but it's been from the opposition. So it's all well and good for the Liberals to talk about healthcare right now, but I think by and large, taking pharmacare and dental care aside, by and large, people are concerned with the long lineups. They're concerned with how long it takes to get a surgeries. They're not happy with the healthcare system they're seeing right now. So I found it strange that the Liberals they're leading off this ad campaign to try to save their bacon by talking about healthcare, which is something that people are the most frustrated about.
Well, we know people are also frustrated a lot with housing and the cost of living, and we did see Susan, the Conservative leader, come out with another major plank of his housing plan this week, to removing the GST on new homes under $1 million. We heard the message come back from Liberals that this is just going to be cut to other housing programs, I should say, as Mr. Poilievre has talked about ending the Housing Accelerator Fund, for instance. So do you think that's going to be an effective strategy for Liberals, given that, look, Mr. Poilievre is talking about a tax cut and Liberals are talking about what a lot of people see as just bureaucracy?
It's a good question. I would point all viewers to go have a look at some of Sean Fraser, who's the housing minister's exchanges with Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons this week. Very entertaining. Mr. Poilievre's doing Mr. Poilievre, and Mr. Fraser is doing folksy Nova Scotia lawyer on his feet, and he's very funny. Mr. Poilievre, I think his idea is creative, cut the GST, but where Mr. Fraser is besting him is Poilievre is going to pay for this GST cut by cutting the Housing Accelerator Fund. And that's the fund that's actually getting houses built to municipalities. And as Mr. Fraser pointed out, that's what Mr. Poilievre's MPs have been writing to him and talking to him, saying, could you please bring the Housing Accelerator Fund to my community? The one tricky bit with Mr. Poilievre's announcement is he wants to take the GST off the final price, but not all the inputs that the builders have to make all the way along the way. So the only way the builders get that back is on the final sale. So I don't think it's actually going to make housing any cheaper for people. It's a bit of lipstick on something that doesn't really change anything.
Cole, I'll let you weigh in on this.
Sure, yeah. I looked to the opinion of Mike Moffat, the housing policy expert on this, and he said that it was not quite but almost perfect. He said that there was no other better policy put forward to date in terms of addressing accessibility to housing for middle-class Canadians. So I look to that and I see, you know, a pretty validating stakeholder there, endorsing the Conservative policy. I also look at where Canadians are at in terms of, you know, the age demographic that is most concerned about housing, and that's millennials, 30 to 45, and millennials are, yes, in their 40s now. And as they look to buy a house, which looks impossible for all of us, we look towards any policy that'll make that a little bit easier. So I can see why Canadians trust Conservatives the most on housing above any other party, because Conservatives are the only party that's talking to young Canadians on the issues that they care about.
George, do you think that argument will have legs from the Conservative Party about we need to get rid of these programs, the Housing Accelerator Fund, Infrastructure Fund, instead really focus on the tax cut side of it?
Well, I do think it's a typical Conservative argument, right? Like, you know how to spend your money better than government does, and we're going to cut your taxes. And that's the problem for those of us who want to build real long-term solutions is that those are easy things to sell. And so I think it is a smart policy, you know, and any time that Pierre Poilievre can quote a Liberal policy advisor, I'm sure that's fun for everyone. But I think that and I think back to the ad, I think that's one of the places the Liberals should be spending more time, is talking about where Pierre Poilievre's going to cut. And frankly, he's not denied anything, so why not accuse him of everything? Because he will. Like, they're going to find places to cut. And cutting the GST off home sales is going to take a lot of money out of the revenue side, so they're going to find other places to cut. So these programs on housing will go, healthcare cuts will be real, but actually talk about those things more concretely, I think, is key.
Okay, there's been a lot of moving pieces on Parliament Hill this week. Questions about leadership, questions about confidence votes in the House of Commons. We have the Bloc saying, look, we're going to push to defeat the government now. The government did not meet our demands on pensions or on supply management. And then, George, we had the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, come out yesterday and say, look, we're not going to play games with the Bloc or the Conservatives. Even though we don't like the Liberal government, we're not going to let other opposition parties call the shots and have the Bloc help Conservatives make cuts, in his words. What do you think of that message from Mr. Singh and where it's positioning the NDP between the Conservatives and the Liberals?
Well, I think for sure what needs to happen is the NDP needs to find ways to push themselves a bit apart from the Liberals while also trying to get the programs through. We were talking about pharmacare and dental care, and I think in a very real way, the NDP wants to get more than 1 million. They want 2 million, 5 million people on the dental care program. They want to see pharmacare get out there and people actually benefit from free birth control pills and diabetes medication. So they want to get those things out there. And I think that should be the message. Let's get this thing rolling. Right now, talking about the way that, sure, they don't want to let Poilievre or the Bloc direct them in any way or bullying them into a vote, but I think they also need to stand up and show some strength on their own.
Susan, what do you think about this, the positioning that we're seeing here with the NDP, the Bloc, and the Conservatives?
Well, if the question for people at home is, are we going to have an election really, really, really soon? The answer is no. Not a federal one. For those people who live in Ontario, are you going to have an Ontario election really, really, really soon? I think the answer is yes. So I think there are a number of moving parts and pieces. The NDP aren't ready to go, don't want to go yet, do want, I think, to try and expand some programs, but also recognize if we go right now, the polling numbers are what the polling numbers are, and the NDP will not have the same kind of impact that they do in a minority government. So they'll wait. The Bloc is in no hurry to go, I don't think either. No one wants an election before Christmas. I still think we're looking at a spring scenario. I still think we're looking at a Liberal government bringing in a budget in the spring that won't pass. That'll be the scenario that'll happen, because if Ford goes in June in Ontario, that's going to vacuum up a bunch of dollars, a bunch more volunteers that are also tired from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and BC provincial elections. So there's actually the federal provincial dance is a very interesting one to watch too, and that will also have impact on the timing of a potential federal election.
Mm-hmm. Cole, talk about this timing that Susan mentions, because from the Conservative perspective, and we hear it in question period, why not call a carbon tax election? Why not call a carbon tax election? How do Conservatives keep the momentum that they're clearly seeing in the polls going forward when really they can't necessarily control the timing of an election right now?
Yeah, I think the Conservatives will continue to press the Liberals and the NDP, and I look at Jagmeet Singh and he says, well, I won't play their political games. Well, that's interesting, because you made a big show of ripping up the confidence and supply agreements, then to only vote confidence in the Trudeau Liberals again. So I think every time he does that, that erodes his credibility, and the Conservatives will point to that as proof of that. And I think Conservatives, or Canadians I should say, have a problem taking Singh seriously right now, especially with this in particular. And I think, after the next election, Pierre Poilievre will be Prime Minister, and Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh will no longer be the leaders of their respective parties.
All right, we will see. We have to leave it there. Cole Hogan, Susan Smith, and George Soule, thank you. Time now for a look at what else happened in politics today.
Denial of the truth about the harms of Indian residential schools has a profound impact on survivors, their families, and communities. To be heard and believed, and to have the truth be visible and acknowledged, is a fundamental right and a prerequisite to healing.
That is Special Interlocutor Kimberly Murray. She's supporting the call to ban residential school denialism. New Democrat MP Leah Gazan has a bill making it a criminal offense to publicly condone, deny, downplay, or justify the residential school system. And Murray's final report this week says the government needs to support such a ban.
These are people who won't wind up in emergency rooms. These are people who will have preventative work done so they don't get sick. We need to do this across our health system.
We have updated numbers today on the Canadian Dental Care Plan. Health Minister Mark Holland says more than 1 million Canadians have now received care, with more than $700 million covered in expenses. Health Canada also reports 2.7 million people are approved for coverage. Right now, the plan covers seniors, children, and people with disabilities. Expansion is planned for next year. Meanwhile, Quebec is hitting pause on 2 major immigration programs. The provincial government announcing today it is suspending a couple of key pathways to permanent residency. The suspension will affect immigrants applying through the regular skilled workers program and the Quebec Experience program. The latter is mainly used by foreign students. Immigration Minister Jean-François Roberge says the change is needed to better regulate immigration in the province. The pause is slated to be in effect until next June. The federal government's newest cyber threat assessment comes with a warning. Foreign states are getting more aggressive online, and the list threatening Canada extends from China and Russia to Iran, North Korea, and now India. Meanwhile, ransomware is a major threat to Canada's critical infrastructure over the next 2 years. Let's delve into this more with Bridget Walshe. She is Associate Head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
I want to begin with state actors. Your National Cyber Threat Assessment comes out every 2 years, and your report says that really a big change that we've seen over the last 2 years is that state adversaries are getting bolder and more aggressive in terms of how they seek to disrupt and divide. Talk to me a bit more about what that looks like.
Sure, absolutely. As you say, we put this assessment out every 2 years. And it's an assessment that's put together using sort of a compilation of information, intelligence that we have, along with what we observe in defending Government of Canada networks. And what we've seen is that I would look at it as a twofold piece. So one, that the techniques and the assertiveness used by some of those state-sponsored threat actors is certainly becoming more aggressive. But also that when you note that state actors may be looking to divide Canadians, what we're also seeing is actions taken in the cyberspace world to move into spaces of dis and misinformation that are certainly used to form opinions, change opinions, and can be used to divide Canadians. Okay,
I want to ask you about a couple of specific countries then, starting with China. Your report says their cyber program is second to none, that it's the biggest cyber threat to Canada. Tell me more about that, because in the report, it does say that over the past 4 years, there have been at least 20 attacks or 20 situations where Government of Canada agencies have been compromised by actors linked to the PRC. So how active are those threats right now?
So the threats are active. And it's one of the reasons that we want to be as clear as possible in the report and share as much information as we can. When it comes to China as a cyber threat actor, their scale, the size of their operations, their sophistication, and their intent all place it into that category where we do say it poses a major strategic threat to Canada. In a lot of ways, that means that they are conducting activities on a daily basis. So, for example, conducting reconnaissance activities against Government of Canada networks, against networks of other levels of government, looking at civil society, looking for what are essentially like unlocked doors. So scanning activities means that a threat actor is looking to find a vulnerability, a way in. It doesn't mean that a network is compromised, but it does mean they're taking those activities. So we see that on a daily basis coming from China.
Okay. In the time we have, I do want to ask you about India as well, because India was not in your last report, and we've been talking a lot about India recently in terms of foreign interference. You say Indian state-sponsored actors likely conduct cyber threat activity against Canada. How big is the threat from India, and what are the factors that are going to influence that going forward?
Sure. So we see India, and what we've observed over the past 2 years, that we see India as an emerging threat to Canada. When it comes to how we arrived at that, looking again at all of the intelligence and information we have in defending Government of Canada networks, when we talk about India, we're really seeing likely. And so from that perspective, I think it's important to keep in mind that, in situations where relations may decline, we see that those threats can increase.
Okay, I want to go back. You mentioned misinformation and disinformation. We are due to have a federal election at some point within the next year. From an agency standpoint, what are your concerns about cyber threat cyber threats, specifically as they relate to voters, relate to political parties, relate to the entire electoral process?
So mis and disinformation is something we're concerned about. We work closely with colleagues across the security, intelligence, and community, in particular global affairs, the RCMP, and CSIS, to look at the overall threats, including cyber threats facing elections from foreign interference. From a disinformation perspective, some of the things that we do see are the increasing use of artificial intelligence to generate and to propagate mis and disinformation, and it really sort of changes the game, where a threat actor has more capacity to push misinformation out, and more techniques to make it look more believable. So it's really important that anyone looking at the news, at information online, at everything, has a very critical eye on what they read.
Okay, one last question for you, because at your news conference yesterday, the chief of CSE said, you know, we're often asked what keeps us up at night, and the answer is, well, pick the page out of this report. So when Canadians hear something like that from top officials, how concerned overall should we be about our cybersecurity?
Yeah, so one thing that our chief did say that, yes, pick the page, these things do concern us, but she also said, look, we're doing a lot. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that every Canadian should be thinking about cybersecurity, what they can do to keep themselves safe. We have a wealth of information available on our website, but also that we and our colleagues across the Government of Canada, partnerships with industry, are working very closely together to address those threats.
All right, Bridget Walshe, appreciate your time on this. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
We are 5 days from Election Day in the United States. The Harris and Trump campaigns are both focusing on key Sunbelt states today. And the Democratic nominee is criticizing her Republican rival over what he had to say about women last night. Have a look.
And my people told me about 4 weeks ago, I was saying, no, I want to protect the people. I want to protect the women of our country. I said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say, pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it? I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
This is just the latest on a series of reveals by the former president of how he thinks about women and their agency.
The Harris and Trump campaigns have both put a lot of effort into Pennsylvania. It's a swing state that could decide who goes to the White House. And Bucks County is a key district near Philadelphia. Earlier, Michael Serapio spoke with a Pennsylvania state senator, Steve Santarsiero. He chairs the Bucks County Democratic Committee.
Senator, thank you for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you, Michael. Thank you.
Listen, it looks like the road to 270 will require Pennsylvania, particularly for Kamala Harris. How much pressure does that create for you and your team on the ground right now?
Well, I think everyone understands the stakes of this election. I think we've understood that for some time now. So I'm not sure that there's any added pressure, but I do believe that we all take a understand we have a special obligation to make sure that we win in Pennsylvania for Vice President Harris.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding is the state has already seen about 1 million advance ballots returned to their respective county board of elections. The early accounts say that the advance votes are leaning heavily Democrat. Does that give you any kind of comfort right now?
Yeah, well, it is in keeping with what the experience has been since we passed Act 77 back in 2019. It's a state law that enables people to vote by mail. And since that time, it's been a disproportionate Democratic vote. So I'm encouraged that that trend has continued. I'm also very encouraged, at least here in Bucks County, that right now, as of I think 24 hours ago, we were over 69 or 68% of Democrats having returned their ballots. So, requesting the ballots is important, but then actually getting them back in is really critical. If we stay on this pace, I feel confident that we will get to a point where by election night, somewhere around 94, 95% will have returned their ballots. Obviously, we are pushing to try to get as close to 100% as possible. But that was the number back in 2020, and I think if we're, in that ballpark, we're in a good position.
You and I were talking, and it's interesting because the advance ballots have certainly been attacked by the Trump campaign the first time around, the second time around, and right now you are saying that there are videos that are circulating that is casting some doubt on those advance ballots. How worrying is that?
Well, it's a concern. There was one really, frankly, racist video that circulated yesterday. It was quickly taken down when it was called out. It had a man of Asian descent opening up mail-in ballots that were not real mail-in ballots, finding a Trump vote, and then ripping it up. And the intent was pretty clear to make it seem as if that the mail-in ballot system is not on the up and up, that it is going to be used in a fraudulent way to help Kamala Harris. And that both undermines the integrity of our vote-by-mail system, but it also then sets the predicate for the lie after the election, should Kamala Harris win, that she wasn't, in fact, the victor. It's what we saw in 2020, and I'm starting to see more of an effort by people affiliated or at least supporting Donald Trump to do the same thing this time.
Now, if you look at the polls, they say Pennsylvania is essentially a toss-up, that when they look at the numbers, depending on the polling firm, things fall within the margin of error. I'm wondering, though, with you being a state senator, do the polls actually reflect what you're seeing on the ground, or are you seeing one advantage for one party over the other?
So, it's very hard, of course, when you get into those last couple of weeks of an election to know with any certainty. But you have a gut feeling, has been my experience over the 25 years that I've been involved in politics here in Pennsylvania. And that gut feeling in my case is that we are going to win here. And that's born mostly by anecdotal evidence of voter reactions when we canvass at the doors, some of the things we're hearing from other people about many Republicans, frankly, as well as independents, who are just done with Donald Trump and will not vote for him.
Now, of course, your governor was reportedly shortlisted in that it could have been a Harris-Shapiro ticket instead of a Harris-Walz ticket. Given how things are right now in Pennsylvania, how close the numbers are, was that a missed opportunity?
Well, listen, Josh Shapiro is a personal friend of mine, and I was among many Democratic elected officials here in Pennsylvania who was pushing for him to be on the ticket. Look, Governor Walz is a wonderful vice presidential candidate. He's done great things in his home state of Minnesota. And I think at the end of the day, Vice President Harris and he will win here in PA. Do I think that Governor Shapiro would have helped the ticket here in Pennsylvania? No doubt about that. But the great thing about Josh Shapiro is that he works hard, and he's out there right now working hard for this ticket, stomping, up and down Pennsylvania, across the state, and just about every region of the state, working to make sure that we're successful on November 5th. So I'm confident that that will happen.
And you can watch more of that interview with Michael Serapio and Steve Santarsiero by visiting cpac.ca or our CPAC YouTube channel. That is Primetime Politics for Thursday. I'm Andrew Thompson, and for all of us at CPAC, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Have a great night.